We have people from all over the country.
Mm-hmm.
This is amazing. From Bombay, from Bhubaneswar.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much, everyone, for your introductions in the chat. Keep them going. This is a warm invite from our end for you to really use this chat as a way to express yourselves. Of course, if there are key questions within the conversation with Ananda, we can allow you to speak. But it's lovely to get to know the audience a little more. Again, everyone, a warm welcome on behalf of YfS and the Youth for Sustainability India Alliance. I will just take 2 minutes of Ananda's time on the 60 minutes that we have together. So my name is Pauline. I am the co-founder of YfS, which also happens to be one of the founding members of the Youth for Sustainability India Alliance. And both these organizations are very much aligned, not only in their topical focus on social and environmental sustainability, but also because we really believe at the very core of our beliefs in the power of collaboration, in the power of sharing, in the power of networks. And for that particular reason, once every couple of months, we organize together with YfS and the YfS India Alliance, a masterclass, or what we call also a YfS skill up, with one expert in a particular topic that we know is an expertise gap within these networks. And today we are really lucky and really happy to welcome Ananda Mitra, who has become a very good friend quite recently. You will discover his really warm and expert personality in just 1 minute. Ananda is a professor of communications in North Carolina, right? Wake Forest University. And, you know, we really believe that in these networks of YfS and the YfS India Alliance, communications has a really key role to play, especially for all of the organizations, NGOs, social enterprises, and other kinds of stakeholders that maybe struggle a little bit to speak about, to develop a specific narrative and storytelling about their activities, right? And this is of the foremost importance, not only at the personal, but also at the organizational level, to get the interest from people, to mobilize people around your cause, and to develop the right clarity and understanding about what you are trying to do. So we really believe that this masterclass with Ananda is going to teach us a lot, myself included, about how to communicate about yourselves and about your organization and the causes that you have at heart. Interestingly, Ananda is the one person that coined the term of NARBs, narrative bits. This is one of the little things that I'm excited to learn more about during this session. But I've already spoken too much. Ananda, over to you. I'm really excited to listen to you today. Thank you so much for being here at 5:30 a.m. in North Carolina.
Well, thank you, Pauline, and thank you. We now have, we have 65 participants. This is amazing. It's kind of scary. On a Thursday afternoon, on a winter's afternoon, just before Christmas. Guys, I'm really thankful for you being here. And obviously to YfS, to Pauline, and to Meghdut for making this happen. As Pauline said, I've come to know Pauline and Meghdut and the work of YfS recently, and I've been absolutely amazed by the kind of work that they're doing. I think I met some of you, might have seen me just briefly at the mixer that we had about a 3 weeks back. So I appreciate your being here, taking the time out. So just to follow up on a little bit on what Pauline said, my background, I'm originally from Kolkata, obviously, and I've spent almost all of this year in Kolkata, going back and forth between Wake Forest and in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, and Kolkata. And in that process, I met Pauline and, as I said, Meghdut, and so we developed this idea of doing this. So I'm originally trained as an engineer, believe it or not, out of IIT Kharagpur. Some of you might be familiar with that name. And then I came to the United States, way back when. So long ago, I can't even remember. And I started to work in the area of human communication. Human communication is a vast area within which language, storytelling, narratives, all of that plays an incredibly important role. Uh, in around 1990s, what started to happen is obviously the expansion of the digital spaces and the digital zone, the whole digital world started to come about in the early 1990s. And that by the turn of the century, what ended up happening is we were all becoming very much digital beings. Some of you were probably born right around that time. And so you might not even remember the old days before cell phones, before all of the digitization that we have experienced. And what that did is it actually changed the nature of communication vastly. And what I'm going to try and do today is emphasize the notion of narratives, emphasize the notion of stories, and why stories do matter, and how the expansion of the digital spaces and the changes in the way we have access to these spaces has given us opportunities and has posed certain responsibilities on each one of us in how we work with stories. So with that in mind, and the game plan here is being a webinar. If you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. I'll try and answer those questions as we go along. And if you just want to listen for a little bit and then take up questions later in the afternoon, at the end, close to the end of the session, either way is fine. So stories. What are stories? We're storytelling beings, guys. We live with stories. One of the first things that we do when we meet somebody else in the personal spaces, in the real life, is what is the question we ask? Where are you from? Where are you from? That fundamental question is one that begins to create our story, our narrative, right? So here I am sitting in North Carolina, and if somebody were to ask me here, let's say my plumber comes along, where are you from? Well, I'm from Winston-Salem, man. And if I'm sitting in Kolkata and the plumber comes along, where are you from? I'm from Salt Lake as in Bidhannagar, right? So these are stories. So what has happened in the realm of communication? It has been argued that human beings operate at a level called the rhetorical being. The word is rhetorical. Let me share screen, please, for a second. Yeah, I'm just going to put on screen certain words I'll be using. And some of these words might be, you might be familiar with it, but given different kinds of trainings of different people, you might have different ways of interpreting these words. So we are rhetorical beings. By that, we mean that we make our decisions, what we think of doing, and how we convince people to do what they want, what we want them to do, through rhetorical tropes. Goes back to classic Greek. Anybody who's trained in classic Greek, the work of Aristotle and others, we do persuasion, for instance, by telling people that this is ethical, this is logical, this is emotional. So that way we are rhetorical beings. The second way that we operate, and you'll understand this, is we are rational beings, which simply means that we make rational choices. When we make a choice, we argue that this is the best choice given all my options at this moment, and thus we use rationality, we use logic. We look at the evidence and we make our choices. But what started to happen in the mid-80s, 1980s, and I'm going to put some names down here just for your reference. You can look these up later on if you're interested. A scholar called Walter Fisher made a very interesting argument. He said that, look, human beings are also narrative beings. This seems so obvious, isn't it? It's so obvious. We make our decisions often based on the stories that we hear. Just now, imagine this, just now, when Pauline introduced me, she told a story about me, right? That was her version of who I am. And each one of you, as you finish this, or as you are saying, as you're putting this out on chat, you're telling a tiny, tiny story about who you are. And with those stories, remember I just said, with those stories, I have some decisions to make. So I can say that, look, here are people from all over the country. These stories are incredibly important. Now, when Walter Fisher comes up with the idea of the narrative being that we make decisions based on stories, what was happening, remember it's in the 80s. What's happening is the stories were being told by authors who were almost institutional authors. So Fisher was working with people like Shakespeare, or Fisher was working, and he is a Western scholar, so he obviously was working with the Western, authors, Shakespeare, or Plato, or Cicero. These are names from ancient, from Greek civilization, from Roman civilization, and more recent people like Shakespeare. And he made the argument that these people tell stories, and in these stories, you can understand the world around in which they live. So go back to Plato's work, go back to Cicero's work, you'll see what they were living in. And through that, they're making an argument about the world. And if you read that, you would understand what the world was like. Go to Shakespeare and look at some of the work that he does. All that was good, but something changed in the 90s. In the 90s, all of a sudden, you and me started to gain what we call cultural capital. It's a kind of capital. It's not financial. It doesn't need money, but it is the cultural capital that we gained. And we said, you know what? We have a digital device. In the 90s, the digital device was still pretty primitive, a cell phone and a GPS receiver and so forth and so on. But as things changed, as many of us started to carry the smartphones in our pockets, we started to realize that we are all storytellers, and we can tell our story, and we obsessively started to tell our stories. I'm giving you a little bit of history here so I can contextualize where I'm going. We started to obsessively tell our stories. You know how we did that? We did that, and again, many of you are probably quite young, which is nice, but people in our generation started to use Facebook. Facebook comes along, and all of a sudden, everybody's jumped on Facebook, and they're saying, hey, you know what? I had dinner with my friend last night. You know what? I went on this vacation. They're my vacation pictures. And people lapped it up. To ask you a simple question, you're not going to be able to answer that. You ask you a simple question. You can type it out in chat, and I bet you'll get this wrong. What country or what space has the largest number of people, and we call it a country? What country would come to mind? Type it out. It's easy. Everybody knows this. Well,
can you repeat, Ananda?
What country or space has the largest number of people in terms of population? China. Thank you. All right, that's good. Now let me ask you a second question. What is the second most populated space in the world? No to India. That's what everybody says. I've done this in so many. The second most populated space is Facebook. There are more people who are active in Facebook, or were and still are, than in India. And you can't ignore that, can you? What is the activity about? It's life stories. They're telling their stories over and over again. They're saying the stories, they're putting it out there. And that's when I started to make the argument, what happens, and I'm going to put Pauline on the spot. What happens if I could look at every single post that Pauline has done ever on Facebook? Maybe Pauline's not on Facebook. Maybe she's on Insta, all right? Imagine that. We have the technology to do that. I have done this in my research. Scrape is the word. Scrape means collect, perhaps even without Pauline's knowledge, which I've done as well, and collect everything that she's ever said. Would I have her life story in my hand, or a major portion of it? My argument was, yes, you would. And I started to demonstrate that. And that's what I started to call NARBs. NARBs are narrative bits, tiny bits of narrative that we leave in the digital space. We forget about these things until somebody like me comes along and says, you know what? I'm going to collect these NARBs. I'm going to profile you. I'm going to figure out what you do, when you do, how you do. And you know what? If I get there, I might even understand why you do something. And that's the holy grail of telling these personal stories. So what happens from the receiver's perspective, which is me, I'm the analyst looking at these NARBs. I'm trying to figure out who Pauline is, who any one of you are, right? But now from your perspective, this is where mindfulness comes in. This is where you start to say that, look, I have a story to tell. And I understand people are looking at this. It is not as if I'm just putting it out just for the heck of it, just to feel good after a nice drink in the evening. And you say, hey, I had a good drink. And you send out 5 pictures that embarrass you 5 days later, right? That's not the way you do it. When you start to understand that you have control on your narms, and you realize that your story is being looked at in the digital space by a lot of people, imagine the power you have gained. And that's the point that I want to make. There has been a change in the stories. We are still narrative beings. As a matter of fact, I would argue we are more narrative beings now than we have been ever before. We're all Shakespeare's. Can you imagine that for a second? We're all Shakespeare's. We're telling our stories incessantly, permanently. I bet you that, given the kind of demographics I have in this room, which is what, it's now got 88 people in it. Can you imagine, why did you come? 88 people spending, or 85 excluding the 3 of us, 85 people spending your afternoon. And every time you put something down on that chat, I got you. I got your life, a little bit of it, all right? Imagine if you became friends with me. I urge you not to, because that's my research, because once you become friends with me, I start to look at you. My son tells me all the time, my son is about 27 years old. He tells me, you're a stalker. That's what you do online. You stalk people. I'll tell you a story. And this is where you start to understand the power of what you have. Many years ago, it's not right, about 27, he was about 17, 10 years ago. He turned 17. And as you know, in the West, in the United States, when you turn 17, all of a sudden you're in high school and you're a grown-up, right? So you want to go to parties, you want to do all kinds of stuff. So he says, I'm in high school, I'm going to go to parties and so forth. And am I allowed to do that? I said, yeah, sure, you're in high school. I told my wife, we'll fight this battle later. I have technology. I'll find him through technology. So he comes along and he says, I want to go to this girl's house, not my girlfriend, but I want to have, she's having a birthday party. I want to go. I said, fair enough. We need an address. I've got to drop you, still not driving. And my wife said, it'd be nice if we can send her a little gift or a card. We need a name, 2 pieces of information, a name and an address. 5 days later, I'm sitting at dinner with him and I said, did you go to the basement of the house? Did you meet the dad? He's a police officer. This young woman, 17 years old, had an open Facebook page. She had told her story. Hundreds of pictures, posts after posts about her life, without understanding that these stories are seen, can be analyzed. That's when you start to realize the power you have, the power that I have in some ways, or people like me, I have is understanding you. And now when you understand that, you have the power to say that, look, there's so many people here. Let me just scroll back. Let's start with, there are a bunch of your students, but just look at YfS. YfS is an institution. You have a story to tell. And every time you're putting something out in that digital space, you're creating a narrative. The key to this is to keep the narrative consistent. Make sure you tell the same story. Right? Don't make the story very elaborate. People don't have time to read these stories anymore, right? They scroll through. I mean, just like now, there's how many posts in this chat room? I don't even know. They're like already maybe about 100 posts in the chat room, right? I don't have the time to read that. We're inundated with stories because everybody's a storyteller. How do you stand out in those stories? What do you do when you say, look, YfS is who we are? This is who we are. What I've realized and I've taught over and over again is consistency. Tell the same story, make it brief, have a tagline. I'm becoming more practical, more pragmatic now. Have a tagline. To be sure, I mean, again, putting Pauline, she's the only one I have I can put on the spot. What's the tagline for YfS? Do I know your tagline? I actually don't. Know your tagline, right? But that tagline will always be there. I work with a young woman. She runs a sari boutique, and she works with weavers. She's got a cause, as you guys are very interested in causes, and she works with weavers, and she has to have a tagline. That same tagline repeats itself, and that's the second thing. That's repetition, because your stories are no longer. You are a Shakespeare accelerating positive change in East and Northeast India. It's the first time I've seen this, Pauline, but this is good. It's like, yeah, it's got to be there all the time. It's got to be everywhere. And so you are a Shakespeare, but the difference is Shakespeare was writing 15 different stories because that was his profession. That's not who you are. You have one story to tell, primarily, all right? And for this particular Weave group, we came up with a tagline, a timeless elegance that repeats itself in every space that we populate, from Facebook to Instagram to YouTube, everywhere. So that's the next part of it, which is the first part. And so I'll share again.
Ananda,
yeah.
I'm just wondering, so finding a tagline, would you say it's also applicable to a person beyond an organization?
Yes, absolutely. What's my tagline? Do you have a tagline for me? You do, Pauline. Remember what you said. You've said this 3 times in the times we have met. And I keep that in mind. I said that Pauline's got a tagline for me. She stuck to this one, which is, this is the guy who came up with NARBs.
That is true. Yeah.
Isn't that true? Yeah.
That is true. I was, if that applies to people, maybe we could invite everyone to start thinking about their tagline. That would be absolutely. See, this is what I was trying to make. The point is, you are a Shakespeare, but here's a fundamental change in storytelling. Think about what all of you are familiar with Shakespeare. Think about any author. You're familiar with Indian authors. Look at, whoever, Sunil Ganguly from Bengal, right? Rabindranath Tagore from Bengal, Shakespeare from England, John Le Carre is John Le Carre French? No. Think about a good French author. This is my Victor Hugo, Voltaire, Baudelaire.
Yeah, all of them. But notice these authors were telling fiction. Even though Shakespeare's work might be based in British royalty or, some myths, some stories, but they were not telling their life story. The difference now is we are telling our life story. And therefore, we need a tagline that defines who we are, all right? To me, to you, YfS is accelerating positive change, right? So Pauline, if you think about your own tagline, that perfect tagline that comes out in Instagram for you, I'm again putting Pauline on the spot, that showed up on Instagram. We're eating the Indian Bengali food. There's a little tagline right next to that. I said, wow, this is amazing. This is our story. This is fantastic, right? So each one of you have that story, but that's the personal tagline. But each one of you, or most of you, I would say, also represent an organization. The first person that introduced, I believe herself, Shompita Mukherjee from Humankinds. What is Humankinds? How many times should I know Humankinds? Where do I show up? How do I describe myself? Because one of the things that I'm getting a little all over the place, which is fine. This is how I like it. And I'm glad Pauline is keeping me, making that happen, going all over the place. One of the things you have to keep in mind is when you gain this cultural capital, when you have gained the ability to create your Humankinds, we put capital into social. Say, great, that is fantastic. We just used the word capital, right? So now you keep on repeating that. You keep on showing that up in every space. But you also have to make sure that these words have meanings, because this is who you are. Just reading that part. So that's the next move I'm going to make. That in that narrative space, you're creating the narrative space, as in all narratives. They're protagonists, they're actors, there are issues, there are events, there are opinions. And as you're creating your own narrative, you start to say that, look, it is not only we put capital into social space. What do you mean by social space? So the narrative has to break down, as in any story. And don't make this very complicated in your minds. We live with stories, guys. Without stories, we'd be nobody. Everybody lives with stories. Imagine your life. Imagine your life if you never heard a story. If you never had the opportunity in your life to have an elderly person, maybe a grandparent, set you down and tell you a story. That's how we gave meaning to life. We created meaning out of those stories. But today, we have the ability to create our own meaning. And we have the responsibility, given the kind of folks that you are. Stories make memories. Oh my goodness. I might pronounce this incorrectly, man. Odrija Boshu, stories make memories. I'm getting to that momentarily. All right. So you have, as I said, you have a responsibility. You guys represent all kinds of people who have a fundamental similarity. So this community has a story of its own. The Y East community has a story of its own, which is the collective stories of the people who make that group. All of you have come together because you feel that you have a social responsibility. Call it the SDGs, call it what you want, but that consistency is really important. That's what corporations have been doing for years. Every single corporation, major corporation that you can think of, has had their taglines. But today we can. You can have a tagline because you have the cultural capital, as I keep saying. What corporations had forever, and corporations still have. Techno India is a massive, massive corporate. What's Techno India's tag? I don't know. I'm just asking. Is Techno India have a tagline? Or Meghdut's tagline? Yeah. Make Calcutta relevant again. Amazing. And notice what Meghdut does. I don't know if you know Meghdut. What he's doing is he is using it in every single forum. That's the other idea of storytelling nowadays. Use that capital. And it's not financial capital. Meghdut has, Pauline, YEs, all of that has a lot of financial capital. That's great. But you don't need that financial capital. Today, was blessed to have grandparents and many elderly children. Afreen, good to see you, Afreen. How are you? Yeah, what we gain today is the ability of that cultural capital and use it very wisely. If you have the advantage of financial capital, then do that as well. So when we start to create these stories, we are creating new spaces, new meanings. And one of the powers, and again, I'm really focused on YEs because that's my audience. One of the powers that you all have, harnessing technologies, enriching lives. Wow, there you go, notice. So who put that in there? Did Upper?
It's Aparupa, she was faster than me.
Okay, Aparupa, you put that in there. How many of you actually knew that tagline? I did not. And I've been working with Techno India, I would say for most of the year, right from the beginning when I started meeting with the leadership of SNU, Sister Nivedita University. I'm a visiting professor there, so I teach there. But tell you what, I didn't know that tagline, and that's really not good. That's where the problem is. Y East is a group of people who have your individual stories. Let's find a space, or find, not by a space, I don't mean a place, but find that conceptual, intellectual space where you all can bring your stories together, read each other's stories, repeated stories. Because what you will do over time is you will build what Odrija said just now, memories. Those memories will circulate in the digital sphere. Those memories will become a part of the public sphere or the discourse in the public sphere. I'm using terminologies which might be a little bit technical. By discourse, we mean things we say, right? And we are saying it in so many different ways right now. We're putting it in pictures, we're putting it in moving images, in still images, in sounds, right? And that discourse, that consistency of the discourse eventually creates meaning. And as we continue to see that discourse, we understand the meaning that Y East wants to create. Y East is relatively new. How long has Y East been around, Pauline? About 5 years? No, not even that.
It's going to celebrate its 3rd birthday in May.
There we go. I hope to be there. So yeah, so you got 3 years of memories, guys. Do you have that collected? So one of the first steps in doing this is to consider the stories that are out there. Collect them together, curate those stories. And once you've curated them, you put that out in the digital space. You put it out over and over again. And before you know it, you have memories. I'll tell you another memory story, which is really creating ripples in at least my family. I was in Kolkata. Up until the last, when I left on the 13th, literally 3 days ago. And in cleaning up my old house, my parents' house, I found a diary, stories, memories, handwritten 1977, which is ancient times to you guys, right? I kept a diary in 1977. There are 300 entries for that entire year. And I'm starting to put that out. It has mention of my family. It has mention of my friends. I'm slowly putting it out. And people are getting a little concerned. What else is in this diary? What other memories are going to come out? That's a very, crafty thing to do. But imagine 5 years down the road when YEast is flourishing. It has made its mark in Eastern India. You can go back and curate those curated memories. Those curated stories will become the meaning of YEast. So I want to make this point very clear that stories give meaning. Remember the whole idea of narrative being that I started with. It gives some meaning to who you are. And that meaning is something you construct. Never before in the history of human communication has an individual gained the amount of power that we have today. You have the power to create your own meaning. Not only do you have the power to create it with the use of language, and by language, I mean everything from the written word to the moving and the still images, but you also have the power to circulate it. This is what communication is all about. You create content and you distribute content, right? And you want to see how, talk about social movements, how powerful that is when you have the ability, and sometimes do it inadvertently, guys. It happens. And then you realize, geez, I have done something that has changed the world. Take you back to a story. 2020, May of 2020, young woman, May or April of 2020, young woman, literally a teenager, walking down the street in Minneapolis, Minnesota, saw an event. Some of you know what I'm talking about, right? A Black man in the United States held down by a white person in the United States, and the Black man dies. We're talking about George Floyd. Those of you know about George Floyd, what did this young woman do? She was 17. She wasn't like a reporter or a journalist. I quote her in my book, which is basically, she said, I thought something was wrong. I thought something was wrong. And she captured it. And that story, you know the rest. That's history, right? Black Lives Movement, Black Lives Matter. I would even argue, given some of the research I've been doing or have done, that Trump lost. Jipto Chattopadhyay says George Floyd was an innocent guy. Indeed, man. I mean, this is being recorded. I'm in the United States. I'm not in a free country, really, but it's scary. And that thing changed lives. Changed lives to the extent I'd make the argument that perhaps former President Trump lost the election to some degree because of that. Talk about giving meaning, right? And that's a flagship example. But because these stories give meaning, because these stories give meaning to our existence, to our everyday lives, we now have to be careful. We have to be, and this becomes the next part of my argument. We have to be incredibly mindful and careful about what we say, right? Because it is no longer just a diary that was found in the attic of a house from 1977. How many years is that? About 43 years ago, right? That is innocent. That's just a prank, but not so much anymore. Because like I have been saying all through, you connect these stories together. It's just not one story. It's not just the story of Techno India's tagline, but Techno India is intimately connected with YEast. Isn't that true? Techno India and YEast are intimately connected. Each of these stories matter. And unless we coordinate these stories, and by coordination, it's not a manipulative process, it's a mindful process. Because what had happened with the digital space is many of us, including you guys, including me, did not do this in a mindful way. We just put things up as they happened, but that's changing. People are understanding that in the digital space, we can create influences. We can create branding, if you would, and branding is important. You are branding yourself. YEast is a brand, and that branding has to be done and done in a mindful way. So what is the mindfulness about? First part of the mindfulness is repetition. There's nothing like repetition. Everybody who's ever heard of totalitarian governments, you repeat the thing over and over again, and eventually everybody will believe it. Go back to Nazi Germany, Goebbels. amazing storyteller in a horrific way, right? He repeated it and repeated it, and that created the image. I dare say Trump did that as an institution in the United States, repeated that immigrants are bad. I don't want to go about what's happening in India. It becomes way too political, but repetition is real important. We have learned this. This is not about the digital space. This is about storytelling forever. It almost goes back to Russian propaganda, right? You repeat it. You coordinate your stories. So if there are 4 people who's involved in an organization, in an institution, you understand that all 4 are telling their stories. And that coordinated writing creates the image, creates the meaning for that organization. You want to look at big institutions that are doing that? You all understand what a blog is, right? I write a blog. Some of you might already have a blog. So blog is a storytelling moment. Anne Frank's Diary of a Young Girl, yeah? So Pauline, at some point, you have access to my blog, right? I don't remember the exact, I'll put it in afterwards. So what institutions started to realize, particularly media institutions like news institutions, that, you know, people not only read the newspaper, but they also read the blogs that our journalists create. And they dragged that blog into the institution. They brought it in. So every time you read, let's say I used to write for Forbes, Forbes.com. What Forbes started to do is, yeah, you write that piece, but then you also link it to your blog with the presumption that I'll be telling the same story. Does that make sense? So YfS is made up of, I don't know, several people. Each of you have a blog and you connect it together. This is very mindful. This has got nothing to do with your personal life. This is the other part that I keep saying, that look, Instagram is not just about your personal life. Instagram is an instrument in your hand to advance the cause that you're working for. You might keep 2 different accounts. My son, he's on Instagram. His life is his entertainment, right? Entertainment in the sense he's an entertainer. So he doesn't put, just an example, he doesn't put anything other than his tagline on Instagram. I keep on saying, why don't you, do you not have a life other than this? I said, no, this is my life. My life story is this, and this is what I want people to understand. And, this idea of not only repetition, but the primacy of the story, you go back. Thank you, Pauline. You go back and look at the news industry. I don't know what kind of backgrounds you have, but the news industry has always paid attention to this. The print industry. There is a term in the print industry which is called above the fold. Again, let me repeat that, above the fold. In the print newspaper industry. Can you think what that means? Above the fold? What simply is, you go to a newsstand. Again, I'm using Western examples for a little bit, but if you're walking down streets of Paris, streets of New York, it'll be newsstands, right? And you have these stacks of newspapers that they're selling. What do you see when you see a stack of newspaper? Above the fold. The newspaper folds out. What is above the fold is what you're saying, what we call headlines, right? So above the fold matters. Carry that to the digital space. Don't write stories that are 15, that takes 30 minutes to read. Nobody in their right mind will read it. Nowadays, timelines, yeah. Nowadays, digital spaces will tell you this is a 3-minute read. How many of you will read something if it says it's a 10-minute read? I'll bet you none of you. 10 minutes? 10 minutes out of my life now. So what you start to do is you realize brevity is important. And within that brevity, you have to communicate your story. And you can only do that with that repetition. I'm keeping an eye on the time. I'm going to go for another 5 minutes or so, Pauline, and then I'm going to shut up, and then we'll open up for questions. So where does this take us? What's the future? I would argue that unless you're a good storyteller, forget it. We are all storytellers. We have to become storytellers because we exist in 2 spaces. And this to me is a fundamental thing about the new lives that we are living. You guys will live. I'm going to die by the time this happens, but you guys will live 2 lives. You're already living it. You are a flesh and blood. You are a flesh and blood individual. I cannot hide the fact that I am, well, some people say you're really old, brown-skinned, white-haired male. As soon as I walk through the airport at checkouts or whatever, immigration. I can't hide that fact. Pauline cannot hide the fact that she is a white, young woman. Brown hair, right, Pauline? Is it? Yeah. We can't hide these facts. And perhaps we should never have to. In the world that we'll live in, we should not have to hide these facts. But we also have a second existence, and that is the digital space. We cannot hide the digital space either. How do we then mobilize these two spaces and we create that coordinated, that what I often call the cybernetic, it's an old German word. Those of you know German. Cybernetics comes from German, from the German language. The human machine combination. That's what we have become. Imagine your existence. You will not be existing as a human being without your digital presence. And that digital presence needs to be managed through the stories. What do you wear? Do you make a decision as to what you'll wear when we go out in the morning? We do that, right? I don't do that very well. I'm the worst dressed person in my department, but in my academic department. But people pay attention to that. Why don't we pay attention to the digital space? Because what we wear in the digital space matters. And it matters even more because digital space never forgets. I'll close with one small example. Last year, this is what, 2021, yeah. 2021, in January, a close family member passed away. Happens in every family. No one in my family could remember the exact date. Close, but we didn't pay attention that much. Guess where it was recorded? It was recorded in WhatsApp. I have never, ever deleted a single WhatsApp message that I've received, which is really scary, Pauline. So everything that you ever said is there. And guess what? I started searching through the WhatsApp. That's permanent. I found the exact date when somebody in the family had said he so-and-so has passed away at 10 p.m. tonight. It's permanent. These stories remain forever. So we are right at 6:12. That I'm going to pause, Pauline, and I'm going to turn it back sort of to you and so that you all can manage it. But if there is a lack of questions, then I can continue. I don't see what I'm saying? Okay, so I'll turn it back to you, Pauline, and I'm here to chat.
Thank you so much, Ananda. I don't see questions, but I have a couple of them already ready in my mind. Please, everyone, don't hesitate to share your questions in the chat, in the Q&A box. We keep an eye on it. There is one, but I'm not sure I understand it fully, and I would not want to take it that first, maybe at a later stage. How can say that being a freelancer is essential? Before we go into that, which is quite a specific question, Ananda, just had one introductory question for everyone is, you highlighted on the fact that we in today's world need to be good storytellers to matter and to be meaningful in our work. For the ones that are not born storytellers, that are either shy or too humble to put it out there, or in many different ways of personality, not exactly very comfortable doing it, what are the steps that we can take to better our skills in doing this? If you have a couple of things to say on this.
I'm going to sound like an old school teacher. All right. The best way to learn how to do something is to watch how others do it. Remember, if you're in your schools, that you're told if you're not a good writer in English or French or whatever be the language of choice, read more. So we were encouraged to read, at least in my generation. I'm sure it's true for your generation. Read books. In this case, the reading is different. Read stories that are online. That's the first part. You learn by reading. There isn't any magic trick that suddenly you'll become a good storyteller, right? That's innate, as you rightly said. Some people are good storytellers, even in real life, where you said, you sit down around a campfire or whatever at a bar. There's always one person in the group who seems to take over the storytelling, right? And you enjoy those stories. Learn from that. Listen to that. Now, there is, however, an advantage here. The reason, and this is communication at its best, the reason many people are not good storytellers is connected to the fact that there are people who are not very comfortable in group situations, and they have, for the want of another word, communicative anxiety. A lot of people have that, social anxiety. And these are things that psychologists deal with. But that happens in the traditional face-to-face situation. All kinds of stuff kick into that. Am I going to sound stupid? Am I going to, whatever, all those things. But you have an advantage. You're in the digital space. There is some degree of hiding behind the digital space, right? You can open up more. What's the worst that can happen? Even in social anxiety in a bar, what's the worst that can happen? Someone will laugh at you, right? Who cares? In the digital space, you will find, because your audience is so vast, there will be people who come back and say, whoa, that's a good point. So don't be scared, because always ask this question. I'm being truthful? Yes. Am I trying to be eloquent? Yes, the best I can. Do I have a purpose that is not malevolent? I'm not going to hurt anybody by saying this. If you can pass those 3 tests, put it out. What's the worst that can happen? Nobody will like it. Nobody will comment on it, but don't hold back. This is the time when you can do it. You know why I say that, Pauline? Because as I study the development of the digital space globally, when we started off doing all of this in the 90s, the Electronic Freedom Foundation, EFF, I don't know if some of you are familiar with this, but look up the history of the EFF. EFF was actually started by one of the Who musicians, Garcia, not Who, one of the musicians, anyhow. The EFF we all argued. To give you context on this, Pauline, how did I get involved? Because tiny story. When I was doing my PhD in communication at the University of Illinois, many of my friends from IIT were developing things like web search engines. This is back in late 80s, early 90s, right? So we worked with this guy because I was communication, I knew language and all of that. We worked with these guys, with this gentleman who developed one of the search engines within the university. He goes on and releases this as a browser. You all remember this, called Netscape. So I literally was working with Netscape. So the guy who eventually left the university privatized this, became Mozilla. So we're at that phase of the development. And we all felt, oh, this is the freedom that we needed. The freedom, as you just said, Paul, and the freedom to express ourselves. But as time has gone by, without a doubt, in many parts of the world, that freedom has been curbed. I work a lot with students in China. China, they can't get on Google. They can't get on Facebook. They're on to Weibo and WeChat and things like that, right? Don't take this for granted. People across the world, institutions across the world will one day realize that this thing has gone out of control. All right. And that's when the reins will use this opportunity. Don't hold back because you have that anxiety. All right. So long answer to your question. Does that help though?
It does, and I'll just add to this little story of how YfS was born is actually related to what you say. So I moved to Kolkata in August 2018, and then by October 2018, I was already thinking of the concept of YfS, and I was holding off. I was holding off because, the strategy was not clear. I knew the message, I knew the overall vision, but I was like, this is not something to communicate right now. This is not sure. This is unclear. I don't know exactly what kind of shape it's going to take. And on that day, because I was talking so much about it, Megdut sat me down. And he said, you know what, you're going to write a short paragraph about what you want to do about YfS. And today itself, we're going to publicly announce it and announce that you're going to work on it on LinkedIn and Facebook. And we talked about it. I was a bit reluctant at the beginning. We actually did it on that one day. And the fact of daring to do it and putting this narrative actually had an incredible double effect. The first one is, the positive response was completely there. So of course, it kind of motivates you to go further with this narrative. And second, once you're putting it out there publicly, it kind of holds you accountable to kind of keep going consistently with that line. And so, long story short, the daring of it, trying to put your tagline out there was really a positive experience that I had personally. So yeah, thank you for that. I think that's important, Ananda. Yeah. And so I'll move on to the next question. Moving from maybe the personal narrative a little bit towards the organizational narrative. There's an interesting question. Adrija, I remember your question. I'll put it through. But the last question that we have on the chat is I think quite important. Say we have the narrative, we have the tagline, we have the short storytelling that we want to put out there. What are the communication channels that, to your understanding, are the most powerful, the most efficient, personally versus organizationally, offline versus online? If you can say a few words on this.
Yeah. So I see that question coming from Kailash Patel. That's the one you're talking about, right, Pauline? So I answer it. I will answer it by hedging the question, but making you think. So remember what I just said. We have a dual existence. On one hand, we are flesh and blood. On the other hand, we are digital. We have to utilize both. And in some weird ways, these two come together like right now. You know, I can see Pauline, she can see me. You guys probably can see me as well. Am I flesh and blood? No, I'm not. I'm a digital picture, right? So I'm hedging the answer by saying you have to do both. Effectivity, if you talk about, you use the word effectively, you have to first stop and think about what do you mean by effective? There are three different effective measures in any communication situation. Number one, persuasion. If I wanted, which I did, if I wanted Pauline to give me an opportunity to do this master's class, I had to convince her. And she's a smart woman, mind you, and she had to see the evidence and say, yeah, it's worth bringing this guy in, right? So that's one part of effective. Was I effective? I think I was. I'm right here, right? The second part of effective is creating meaning. Are you going to create a new space? Are you going to tell them, look at what Facebook did? Facebook created the metaverse. This is digressing a little bit, but Facebook came out and created the metaverse. And they're effective because they started to convince people that this is worth doing. They're not persuading you to do it, but they're saying, I'm going to create a new space. Look at film, traditional film. Film creates new spaces. So you have to really decide, those are the two major ones. Are you creating new meaning, new spaces, or are you simply wanting to persuade? So once you know what your definition of effective is, you will find that it is always a combination. It is not just one or the other. It cannot be one or the other. Take the example of between Pauline Meghdut and myself. It was a combination. I had one goal, which I've just met, doing this thing. And I said, you know, I'd love to be a part of YfS and be useful for you guys in some ways. And we did that by online. We stayed in touch over WhatsApp. We met face to face. Pauline was gracious to invite me to the mixer. So I'm giving a hedgy answer, but Kailash, right? But Kailash, I don't think there is one easy answer to that. It depends on the story as well. If it again goes back to effective. What is the story I want to tell? If I want to tell a convincing story, I might have to do it face to face, which is what you're calling in-person communication. I might have to do a little bit of that, but I can't just stop there. You never stop there. You always follow up. Or you start with the offline or online and you say, hey man, let's meet over Zoom or a cup of coffee if space allows it. So hedgy answer, but there isn't an easy answer either. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you so much, Ananda. Thank you for taking this up. Trying to link as much as possible to Adrija's comment, but going back to
I didn't see Adrija's comment. Okay, stories are tagline. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, Pauline, I interrupted. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in the Q&A. I'm gonna read it out for you. The
Sure.
question. So let me try to connect it to the conversation. The question initially is, how can you say that freelancing careers are essential today, and maybe relating it to the communication, job opportunities and market overall? Is there any trends and tendency that you want to maybe highlight in relation to that question?
Right. So
really knowing that we have quite a few students out there,
sure,
you know, who are probably thinking of what they will do with their beautiful talents in the next couple of years. So yes.
Right. So I will say that I'm a little hamstrung in answering the question. I understand the Western world a little bit better because I've lived there and I've worked with a lot of students, much like you. I'm starting to work with students in India now. I think it really has come down to a point, guys, more and more, where quality of your work really matters, because the competition is brutal. Everybody wants to freelance, everybody who's a good writer, and there are tons and tons of opportunities. Really, there's no end to the number of opportunities of freelancing, where you're basically saying, hey, here's what I write. I would like to write for you. You can, and there are, I'll give you an example. There is a company or a group called Glassdoor. Look this up. Glassdoor is a hiring company, and at any time, there'll be hundreds of freelance writing opportunities. Now, there's something that you guys sitting in India can also look at, because not all of these companies, these are all online opportunities. Glassdoor is primarily online. So they would ask for somebody, hey, can you manage our digital communication? And this would not be somebody who's like an IBM, but this is a mom and pop store in the US who is saying, I don't have time to do this. So that's where you guys can come in as freelancers. You have to be very careful in terms of pricing yourselves. Don't price yourselves out of the market. As a matter of fact, if you can get to do this sitting in India and working with a corporation that is willing to pay you in a different currency, which I'm starting to believe will start to happen more and more. I mean, it's almost like the old outsourcing model, except it's no longer that a large corporation is coming in and buying up a space and opening a call center, but you as an individual is putting yourself out. But with all that said, guys, you have to know how to write well. I mean, I sound like a good old English teacher, which I am to some degree. You know, you have to write well. And what does writing well mean? Brevity, more and more. Eloquence. What does eloquence mean? How do you use your language? How quickly can I hear your argument? And we all do it, by the way. Even today, I've been doing this for what, 20 some years, lectures like this. I practice. Even before this one, I had a conversation with Pauline face to face. What do you want me to do? Pauline was so gracious. She gave me the directions and I said, this is what I have to do. I don't know if I've done exactly what you wanted me to do, but you have to do that. It's practice. Keep writing and keep applying. It never hurts, you know, keep applying. What's wrong? You know, you will get, I was going to say shitload, but a ton of rejections. Get used to it, man. You will get the rejections, but then somebody will bite. You would have written that piece, 300-word piece that you put out there, then they'd say, whoa, you know, this is the kind of writing we want. So that's, again, people, I'm trying to realize this, your generation, millennials, most of your millennials, want quick answers. Unfortunately, in real life, the quick answers don't always show up. You know, you still have to keep trying. And I think with the access to capital, cultural capital, creative capital, and with the way in which you don't need a huge amount of financial and institutional capital to put yourself out, utilize that fact. Does that make sense? You don't need a ton of money. You need time, talent, and it's the story that Pauline just said. Put it out. You know, you sit down and put it out, and then let it roll. What's the worst that can happen?
Thank you so much, Ananda. And relating to this, one of the aspects of collaboration that we are exploring at YfS is actually connecting students with organization of the YfS network, typically socially and environmentally focused organizations that may need the talent of students to work. So if you're interested in this, do check out what we put up from Y's side as updates. Amanda, we are approaching the hour, but I have I don't see any other questions in the chat and the Q&A. I have, maybe selfishly, I would love to ask you one last question, which has been itching for a while. When you create your narrative as a person or as an organization that applies to the social space, you mentioned you needed to be truthful, but there's so many examples of, where to draw the line between an enhanced narrative about you and about what you do, maybe a slightly amplified figures of your impact, of whatever that is that you want to portray. What is the line between enhanced reality and lie? How much can you push the narrative on that front, if that makes sense, Ananda?
Yes, absolutely. It's called taking creative, you're using creative freedom. Simple way of putting it, Pauline, all of you, KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken. You go on YouTube and often you'll see an ad for KFC. You'll see the sandwich. You'll see the nuggets. They look absolutely magical. They look absolutely edible. They look like, oh my goodness, this is so good. You walk into the store and you buy the same thing, comes out as a soggy sandwich. Is KFC lying? KFC is not lying. They're enhancing the truth. They're enhancing who they are by using the technology, saying this is what the sandwich is. This is what you'll get. But when you go in there, it's not quite that. It's bait and switch. But what would be a lie? A clear lie is to say, yeah, you get this, but when you go there, it is not there. Does that make sense? Where I'm basically saying that you can always digitally and through language enhance the impact and say, this is what we are doing. And this is language, guys. This is basic language. Language is our tool. It's not the digital space. Our tool is language. So that's what you're learning. I would never say something that I cannot back up with evidence. It could be the case that by the time I provide the evidence, which is the sandwich, it might not look quite like the picture, but I still delivered the sandwich, right? McDonald's has done this all the time in the United States. A McDonald's ad on television never looks like the sandwich you actually get in the store, right? So are they lying? No, they're not. What is a lie? What is a clear-cut lie? Where you're actually making up a story, where the story does not exist, and you realize that for my purpose of persuasion, I'm going to make up a story. That I would never, that's unethical at its worst, right? But in language, if you can play with language and do that, do it.
So would you recommend all of us to enhance for the ones who are shy, for the ones who do not put themselves into the center of attention, for all of that? You would recommend to enhance?
Yeah, absolutely. Just think about it this way. I look at a picture of a person and I say, you look gorgeous, as opposed to saying you look beautiful. Language. Gorgeous has a whole different impact. Am I being untruthful? No, not at all. Beautiful has a different meaning, right? So that's what I mean by enhancing with language. That's your tool.
Thank you so much, Ananda. Is there any closing words that you would like to add? Oh, we have.
Do you have a digital vlog content? No, there's a question from quick, like Casey and I said, which includes storytelling. Has kind of. Well, a quick answer to that. What's your name? Pratik. Quick answer to that, Pratik, is, and this is my closing comment as well, Pauline. No, I do not do a vlog, which is a video log. I am not skilled in that. And that's another thing. I think that's the closing comment. Look for your skills. What are your skills? There's some people who do pictures, still images. They can tell a story in a still image. I can't. Some people can do a story in a moving image, the vlog. I can't. I do feel like I'm pretty powerful in telling a story in words. So I don't maintain a vlog, but I look at your skill set, look at what your strength is. And in the digital space, you'll find an opportunity to use that skill to enhance your cause or enhance whatever the thing that you're trying to enhance. Does that help? Does that make sense?
Thank you so much, Ananda. There's a lot to reflect on and to sleep on in the next few days. A lot of depth into thinking about how we communicate about ourselves and our organizations to create meaning. I mean, you just said that you believe you're not too bad at using words. That I can assure you that is the case. And had a wonderful 1 hour with you. Thank you so much for your time at such an early hour where you are, 6:30 now, I believe, in the morning over there. Ananda, this is not the last time I meet you, and we have ongoing conversations, but on behalf of everyone, of the students of Techno India, especially of other institutions, of social and environmental organizations among the YfS and the Youth for Sustainability India Alliance, a huge thank you. Merci beaucoup.
Absolutely.
Pleasure.
Thank you guys so much for indulging in the hour of your life. Time is precious, and I appreciate the time you've given me, and especially to Pauline, Megdut, YfS. Great. I hope to be closely connected and see you soon. All right. So stay in touch.
Thank you, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you soon. Keep in touch with us. Tata, everyone. Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye. So I'm clocking out. All right. Thanks.